conversation around the IDP, if properly undertaken, can really be a game changer.
We want to create a space that allows the private sector to become an actor for development.
Every single day we don't find a solution. The crisis is deepening. So how do we move from wanting to change to actually changing?
Welcome to State of Africa. I'm Jeff Mote, your host and Director of Content at the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute, Aladi. Now today, we conclude our focus on forcibly displaced persons with insights from key stakeholders. In Lagos, Nigeria, the UNHCR convened the Africa Roundtable for Private Sector Solutions to Internal Displacement. The discussion? Tackling one of Africa's most pressing crises. Over 30 million internally displaced people. That's nearly half the global total. Mohammed Malik, UN Resident Coordinator in Nigeria, has witnessed the human toll behind these numbers. Nigeria alone hosts approximately 4 million internally displaced people. I caught up with him on the sidelines of the roundtable to discuss the private sector's role.
Let me just highlight maybe 2 points. The first is my pride as a UN coordinator in Nigeria, to see Nigeria hosting this conference and bringing together country and learning from each other, but at the same time bringing different segments, private sector, development partner, government, to work on the issues of IDP. The second is that I just want to link it with what we call the Sustainable Development Goal, which is seen like a kind of social contract, and I can say even the biggest one in the world, that the world leaders are committed to take for their people, to improve their well-being, to protect the people, bring about peace, protect the planet, promote partnership. It's a wide range of issues that if properly undertaken, can really be a game changers for people's well-being, mainly the most suffering people. The conversation around the IDP, if you could hear from my remark, was somehow linked with that process of sustainable development goal. And as I was saying, investing in the IDPs today is not a charity. It's an investment for growth, it's an investment for development, it's investment for human capital development, it's investment for elevating poverty and leaving no one behind, which is one of the core principles. That's why I think this conversation is extremely interesting. But one point I want to add, if you look at the trends of development today, what it takes, the kind of undertaking that humanity need to do, it can't be just bare by a government or by civil society or by development partner or by private sector. No segment in society alone can carry such a burden. It has to be a combined and a joint effort. This is why the 17 SDG, which is the last goal, is focusing on partnership. And I think that's what this conversation brings. How to partner to change the life of the people who are some of the most suffering in any given country you see. Because those are the people impacted by conflict. Those are the people impacted by violence. These are the people impacted by natural hazard. Everything that you can think of in terms of driving human being into suffering, this is what they have gone through and this is what they experience. And I think addressing their solution is part of also the principle of leaving no one behind. It's part of the development process.
And it's interesting because when you look at this particular scenario that we have, especially in the conversation that we're having in the internally displaced community context, what role do you see private sector playing when it comes to dealing with this issue that has both a humanitarian lens, but also as private sector, a commercially viable lens if they look at it through that as well? How do they complement the two?
When we talk about private sector, there has been a school of thought that think that the role of private sector is about, social corporate responsibility. It's about, hands out that you give to people who need. But for me, I think if we build the concept if we build around the concept of what I call share value, because business also have a purpose, which is transforming people's life. And in betterment of people also improve businesses. If you have more educated people, that help business to grow. If you have, that help also to have better workers. If you have more connected people, then your business grow, and then your platform also get expanded into maybe domains that you even wouldn't dream of. You're talking about Kenya, look at mobile money, how it changed the life of people. That can come from private sector, but have a massive and a huge social impact. That's the concept I'm calling share value and win-win. By investing into IDPs, they are impacting on taking or reducing their suffering and taking them out of poverty, but they are creating also condition for their business to prosper, because they will have greater market. They will have market with the citizens who have ability to purchase. They will have market with citizens who are educated, who can be manpower that are qualified. There are a number of share that we have. Now, the area also of IDP require massive undertaking. If I take housing, if I take basic social services like health, education, if I take improved livelihood, in all these sectors, the investment you make can give you return. The state plan we have in the 3 northeastern state of Nigeria have a huge component, for example, in infrastructure. Who can make those infrastructure if not the construction company or the private sector who are in housing? That's also a kind of benefit for them. It's not just that in one way that we look this partnership to go, but I think private sector also can harness massive return by engaging and investing into IDP solution.
For the private sector to engage, the business case must be clear. Michael Botsung, head of the IFC UNHCR Joint Initiative, breaks down the most immediate opportunities on the continent. And we're on the sidelines of a very important conversation happening in plenary. We're looking at how private sector can get more involved in this IDP space, what they can do in terms of meaningful, impactful engagement. But at the end of the day, with private sector, with enterprise, there always has to be the question of why. That's the business case that they're creating. Why are we doing this? And I'm sure that's the premise you always start on when you're looking into this particular space. Let's talk about that. When you're talking to private sector and they ask, Michelle, the big why, how do you respond to that?
Absolutely, Jeff. I think that's the key angle. Based on our experience, we feel that the best way to mobilize private sector in a specific space is that there's a clear business case. So backed up with data, a good understanding of the conditions, the opportunities on the ground. That's the key angle. And if I may use an example of the way we engage in that space, and maybe not yet on IDPs, but in the global forced displacement space. IFC has now been doing that for, I would say, 3-4 years, not just here in Africa, but also more globally. And I think the entry point for us was really convince our client companies that there's a business opportunity. And this has been done very effectively with financial institutions. So the financial inclusion element has been very effective, particularly, I would say, in middle-income countries like Latin America, but also in Eastern Europe, where the way we engage is highlight to the broader financial sector, to the central bank, the regulators, there's a big financial inclusion gap. You have a population here now in your country, which is today not necessarily served, and there are so many. That's their profile. That's the market opportunity potential. So we try to quantify it, present it to the broader industries, and for the companies who see a value and interest, we can engage with them by investing in them or reducing their risk at engaging that space and support them with technical assistance. So the business case is absolutely essential. Mm-hmm. And for me, one of the key learnings of the 2 days we have spent here in Lagos around private sector and internally displaced people is the fact that a lot of companies here in Nigeria, but also in the broader region, in the Sahel, I have already engaged. And I think that's extremely interesting and extremely, that's the big opportunity we need to support. We need to make it happen much more systematically at scale, and particularly, I would say, around agricultural value chains, where we have heard from Nigerian companies, but also companies in Burkina Faso, who are either sourcing agricultural products from local cooperatives, some IDPs, but also have IDPs into their workforce. And I think that's, for me, a good starting point. Now we need to make that happen at scale and much more systematically. And for the companies who don't know, using data about who are those people, what's their skill set, where do they stay, is the key, in my opinion, key entry point.
Right, and you've just highlighted what's happening in the agribusiness space, the value chains in there. And let's talk a bit about the sectors from your vantage point that when you're engaging with your clients and making business cases, you need to show them where the opportunity is, the highest opportunity and potential. Let's talk about that. What are the sectors you're seeing in this particular space that would lend for them to actually come and get heavily involved in it?
There are I think it's very specific to each context. So I think each IDP situation is probably quite specific. But I would say the biggest and the easiest entry point is probably around mobile money and the broader financial inclusion. IDPs, just as the rest of the population, are trying to be connected, are actually exchanging information, trying to use their phones to access financial services. I think that's a big entry point, and I think that's already pretty well served. The other one is often, particularly here in the region, IDPs are coming more from rural areas, so they have maybe a background in agriculture. They are used to practice agriculture, and they could agricultural value chains. So we heard over the last 2 days about cashew nuts production, maize production. Those are really value chains that are really key to support. We have done some work also with companies in other parts of Africa. In poultry, for example, a good client of us in Ethiopia, Ethio Chicken, has really been using some of those committees as distributors for some of their products. And I think we need to take stock of those examples, highlight what works, what doesn't work, what does it take to actually mobilize companies, how can we support them, so that the example, we lead by example. And I think having strong African companies doing it already is the best way to convince others to start looking into it.
True, very true, because they need to see someone who has, as they say, skin in the game.
Exactly.
For it to make sense.
Someone who has done it.
Right.
I think when it's coming from us, well, they may listen or not, but if they see competitors, peers doing it, sometimes in a neighboring country, that's the best model.
Now that's an opportunity to do good and do good business. Let's switch gears now. Julie Gishiru led a pivotal panel discussion with business leaders and financial institutions on perceived risk, financial sector involvement, and untapped opportunities in IDP spaces. On the panel, we had Adeline Somda, CEO of Anatrons, Edward Ogunmekan, Chief Growth Officer at Sterling Bank, Tarila Ebiede, Senior Fragility and Resilience Officer at AFDB, and Christian Mulamula, Head of IFC, Nigeria.
Over the past day, you've heard from many different actors. Please set for us the innovative tools and mechanisms that the AFDB is putting in place to unlock opportunity in this space, and what has struck you as most important from the conversations you've heard so far as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It has been a privilege to share this space with colleagues from different institutions working to address and to find durable solutions to the challenges of internal displacement. And from the African Development Bank, how we think about these issues are informed by a clear strategy of the bank and a strategy of addressing building resilience in Africa. Also, our agenda strategy has informed how we think about, because there are agenda issues linked to internal displacement. And President of the bank is committed to not just economic development, but specifically around the I5s that we have developed as a bank, industrialize, light up, empower Africa, build give people meaningful employment and jobs. And thinking about specifically how this translates to supporting private sector, we need to think clearly, see clearly that all of this, informed by our strategy, shapes specific tools, financing tools that the bank has developed. For example, innovative financing models such as risk mitigation strategies that give partial risk guarantees to private sector players, blended finance, which allows private sector financing to be combined with donor funds to respond to specific needs. And what we try to do, or what we see in our projects, is to ensure that in implementing these tools, that we respond to the needs of communities that are vulnerable, specifically internally displaced communities, internally displaced persons. And when we think about these strategies, we're not seeing private sector as an actor that is dependent on the bank. We're seeing private sector as an actor that is relevant to development. And so when we speak of private sector growth, we're not seeing private sector as just beneficiaries, but actual players that are important to how we transform our continent. At the end of the day, what we want to see is economic development that benefits all, inclusive development that benefits all people, irrespective of their social status in society. This specifically internal displaced persons, host communities, and other vulnerable groups. So in our strategy, we want to create a space that allows for private sector to become an actor for development, not an actor that is recipient of development interventions, but an actor for development. And this is reflected in the type of tools, specifically, that we have designed to allow for private sector capital to function effectively. So we want a situation where private sector capital can go into communities, into spaces that they will not be able to go to before now. So we ensure that issues such as risk, challenges that will limit their intervention, these barriers are removed systematically by guaranteeing that when you do this, we're supporting you to achieve these outcomes. And so these are primary examples, and we can go on and on. Overall, what is important, we want to see private sector contributing to building resilience in Africa.
Excellent. What a powerful point to end on. And it truly is accessible, affordable capital and policies that work at community level that will drive incredible transformation. Let me come to you next, Adeline. And in your space, can you walk us through your financing journey, particularly in these challenging, fragile contexts? What are your experiences? What is working? And what are the challenges you're facing that need to be unlocked?
I will give a bit of the background on Anatrans' story because the challenges are embedded in our story. So Anatrans is the leading processor of cashew nuts in Burkina Faso, and we process about 12,000 metric tons of cashew nuts every year. The commercial season for cashew nuts is between March and May every year, but then the best buying season is March and April. For 12,000 metric tons, we need to raise the crop financing before the end of February so we can buy the nuts and have them available to transform throughout the year. So every year we raise about $10 to $12 million for crop financing so we are able to buy the raw cashew nuts. Anatrans employs today 2,000 people, 90% of them are women. And within these 2,000 employees, we have a lot of IDPs and widows of fallen soldiers. I was saying it on the panel yesterday that we had IDPs working for us and we didn't even know. So when we actually decided to put in place a process to involve IDPs in our business, we realized that we already had some of them. But we've now been very intentional and deliberate about making sure that at least 5% of our workforce is composed of IDPs. So what we have done to be able to have access to financing is to use our story. We have 2,000 women. We are working with 5,000 farmers who we have formed to be able to give us organic and fair trade RCN, because we don't process conventional anymore. With our high production cost, it was impossible to compete with Vietnam. So we decided to go on a niche market, which is the organic and the fair trade market, and then we focused on training our farmers on a good agricultural practice, and also to be able to get the certification for organic and fair trade. So we looked at our business model and we said, well, we are working with 5,000 farmers. We have 2,000 ladies who are working for us. We have this significant impact that we are having in the community in Bobo-Dioulasso, because the factory is based in Bobo-Dioulasso, which is the second city in Burkina Faso. So when it came time to look for funds, we decided to focus on impact investors. It was very difficult to raise funding with commercial banks locally. I don't know about other countries, but in Burkina Faso, commercial banks are very reticent in financing industries. They'll finance export and imports. I mean, the traders who are exporting raw cashew nuts have access to more financing than us, who want to process and export value-added products. So it's good that bankers are in the room. I don't know what is the background here in Nigeria, but it's important for the African banker to focus on industries. We are very much focused on financing raw material exporters, because maybe we think there is less risk in financing export than transformation, but transformation is our future. We've been exporting raw materials for so many years, and it hasn't produced any type of development. So it's important for the bankers to understand the sector, to understand the industry, to take the time to do their homework. Because when we go and talk with the bankers, oh, cashew is very volatile, we don't understand it, so it's very difficult. I mean, it doesn't matter what you bring, what are the documents that you bring in, it's just very difficult. So we turned to impact investors and we used our story. We used our story to be able to raise financing. So the main challenge was for us to go through that transition, to first train our farmers, and to work on putting proper financial and operational controls, because that was also one of our weaknesses. So we had to work on that, and we did. And to also make sure that we have a good governance. So once we went through these challenges, the main challenge that we are still working on is the risk appetite for Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, on top of dealing with insecurity, is also dealing with political instability. And the environment is highly volatile, and investors are very reserved. Over the past 2 years, the amount of impact investors we had access to has dwindled down to almost nothing. Everybody says, well, the business case makes sense, and we like the story, we like the idea, but the country risk is just too high for us. So investors who in the past were ready to assist us and have actually raised funds for us don't want to invest anymore, not because of Anatrans, but because Anatrans is based in Burkina Faso, and they don't really want to do business with Burkina Faso anymore. So for us, this remains the main challenge, and we've turned to the government and the local banks, and I mean, I always go with the narrative of, we said we're going to find local solutions. Now is the time to find them. Let's not just be in the talk and the narrative of we are independent, we are sovereign. It's on the ground that we are going to discover this sovereignty. You have to be able to take over where the foreign investors have left and keep moving. Like, to give an example, this year, as I said, we raise between 10 to 12 million every year, and then we usually finalize our due diligence in November and finalize all of the financing contracts December, so the funds can be made available in February. So this was done, and in January, there was a decision from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to withdraw from ECOWAS. So that decision, of course, it was a domino effect of the investors trying to figure out what are going to be the next political decisions, and is this an environment where we really want to send 10 million euros? Because we really don't know what would be the value of that money if Burkina Faso was to decide to leave CFA. And there were a lot of, social media and it's like, say, there's so much going on and so much extrapolation on the issue. So we do have two of our investors who decided in February to pull out. And that was like right before the beginning of the campaign, but it was just too volatile for them. So that's a challenge. So this year we haven't been able to buy the required ASEAN for the whole year. So we operated part of the year and then we had to stop. And we are now looking for funds to replace those financiers that don't feel comfortable operating in Burkina Faso. So I would say these are the main challenges for us. The first one is I don't know if I should say the inability or the unwillingness of the commercial banks to finance the industrial sector, transitioning into a market where we could have access to impact funds, because that's what we do, impact. Work on strengthening our financial and operational controls so that when money is actually given to us, we make sure that it's safeguarded and that we are put in position to reimburse it. And then the third challenge, which has nothing to do with us, but which is impacting us, is the country risk, which we are still working on.
Thank you. Wow, so interesting. Before I leave you, one very quick question. Because of the challenge you face this year, how many jobs has that affected on the ground? What has the impact of that been?
So 2,000, because we operated up to August, and then we had to stop. So right now, our factory, because as I said, you only have 2 months to buy. So if you haven't bought enough for the whole year, then once you are done with the stock, you can't transform anymore. So I have 2,000 late, 90% of them, so I'll say about 1,800 women. And as I said, I have widows of fallen soldiers and IDPs, and widows, full stop, whose the only way to take care of their family and to put their kids in school is through the work they do at Anatrans. And they haven't been able to, for some of them, I'll meet them in Bobo and they tell me, I haven't been able to send my kids to school this year because we haven't been able to work. So we have had a huge impact on the community with the fact that we were not able to raise, I shouldn't say we're not able to raise the funds, but the financiers decided to pull off because of the political instability.
Right. Thank you for that. Just before I come to Sterling Bank, I want us all just to think about those 2,000 women, 1,800 women, and the role women play in communities, how they hold their families up. A lot of Africans were educated by their mothers in the farms and in the markets, and you see what that does to a family and what that does to the fabric of community. That is the greatest risk that Africa faces today. It's completely, disrupting the ability for any growth, education, opportunity, and dignity. And that's a huge problem. Thank you for taking us through that, Adeline.
Welcome back to State of Africa. Now, before the break, we explored financial pathways for IDPs. Now, how can institutions rethink their approach to drive greater investment in these communities? Let's find out.
Let me come now to you, Edward. Tough time to come to you, but let me come to you nonetheless. One of the messages from Adeline is, let's bank on Africa's. Let's bank on Africa's industry. Let's bank on manufacturing in Africa. I don't want to ask what your interest rates typically are right now, but how do we get affordable, accessible capital to Africans? And what might some of the local solutions be? So for Sterling Bank, do you have innovative products you're looking at? Are you banking on new models of working in Africa that can unlock opportunity? Please, over to you.
Yes, it's a tough time and it's a tough question. Sterling Bank is not the biggest bank in Nigeria, but I can tell you that we're the biggest social impact financier in Nigeria. We focus on what we call the hard sector: health, education, agri, renewable energy, transportation, and tourism. And you would agree with me that these are the areas where whatever development you need. So today, even we have to work with partners. Yes, cost of funds is really high. A commercial loan goes for between 35% and 40%. So we're talking about 3.5%.
35 to 40?
Yeah, in Nigeria today. So we're talking about 3.5% on a monthly basis. But then we've been able to partner with organizations where we've done blended financing. So development banks do support. We have MasterCard Foundation, we have Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You come together to collaborate where you can bring down the interest rate to, in some cases, 0.9%, in some cases 1.1%. So we do that for youth, within agriculture, for gender financing. We've done quite a lot within the IDP communities as well, where we have partners that do the value chain agriculture, social impact enterprises within agriculture. So we do have, and we continue to. So today I have 5% financing for MSMEs. The truth is, we will not make money from that financing. But then when you develop that community, right, then the money you're looking for will come out. We do have a partner that we're working with at the moment, and this partner currently is the largest supplier of maize. And by funding that partner's entire value chain, farmers, we have farmers within IDP camps in Sokoto, within Kaduna, that are within this scheme as well. And those farmers get access to loans under 9%. Working within this ecosystem also helps us mitigate the risks as well. And once you're able to mitigate the risk around lending, then the rates come down. So we need to do a lot more. I can tell you that. We need to do a lot more. And it's the ability to attend events like this and collaborate and have multi-sector conversations in terms of how can we do this together, right? AFD, Africa Development Bank is here. They're partners. Development Bank of Nigeria, Bank of Industry, they're all partners. But the truth is, they can't do it alone. They've been spearheading this conversation. So between the NGOs and the United Nations, then what follows that is the BOIs and development banks of the world. But then commercial banks like ourselves need to also follow suit. But then we have investors as well. So if you were to give me 100 million naira today, you would at least want me to match the market rate at 20%. So if that's the fund I'm lending out, I can't lend it out anything under 20%. So the ability to attract impact funds that allows us to use the core competence that we've built in the last couple of years to now support the industries. And I totally agree as well that a lot of banks don't support manufacturing because sometimes it's cheaper to import into Africa than to buy what we manufacture. Cost of power is way too high. Cost of logistics, the complementary assets required for you to manufacture in Africa is a lot more expensive. So I have poultry farmers. It's cheaper to import frozen chicken from Egypt than to get chicken from Ibadan down the road. It's cheaper. But then it wouldn't change if you decide not to invest in them. So let me finish where I started from. Sterling Bank might not be the largest bank in Nigeria, but we are the largest impact financiers in Nigeria, and we'll continue to do so.
There's a fascinating conversation going on here. Risk is a very important issue. It's being discussed by African presidents around, the risk perceptions of the continent and the cost of capital that comes into Africa, as you know. It's a conversation we heard yesterday, we've heard it today. What is the IFC doing? I think we did hear from Olivier, but I want to prod a little bit further and ask, how do we begin to build a model that works for Adeline and her community, that works for our countries? Because right now, Christian, there's something that's just not working in the system. I'm sorry to land that on you in that way, but we look to you for an answer. Thank you.
That is why we at the IFC believe it is very important to develop your local capital markets, okay? Because unless you have well-developed local capital markets whereby commercial banks, remember commercial banks at the end of the day, how do they do their business? They have deposits coming in and they use those deposits to lend. If they have short-term deposits coming in, they can only lend short-term, okay? If they have deposits coming in at very high interest rates, they have to add their margin onto that and then lend it. So unless you have well-developed capital markets whereby, whether it's the intermediators, whether they're commercial banks or on even the equity markets, you have long-term capital, let's call them deposits, long-term investments coming in, which they can also lend long-term. And that can survive the vulgarities of interest rates, okay? But again, it's important to focus on inflation. That's why the central banks need to make sure we manage inflation, because that also impacts, Anatran. If inflation is high, that impacts the rate at which you can borrow. So developing local capital markets, increasing levels of saving in Africa, increasing the investment through pension funds. So because like in the US, for example, you can borrow for 30 years at as low as 4-5%. Why? Because the saving rates are high and there's huge amounts invested in pension funds which turn around and invest into your projects. That's where your money comes from at the end of the day. It's very important for us, and we at the IFC, we see that as an important task, both on the debt markets and also on the equity markets, because that is where Anatran will go and seek refuge and be able to borrow longer term, as opposed to what she's doing right now, which is short term, which is volatile. If you're able to access longer term capital, it is at a more stable rate. It makes a huge difference to her business. I'll just stop there in that regard. In terms of how we think we can de-risk business, we at the IFC, we like to think of ourselves as a partner. When we come into a project, we want to sit down with you, we want to understand your project, we want to understand not only the financial side of it, we want to understand also the business side of it. I think we had comments here about governance. Governance is an important thing that impacts the way a business is, the risk a business is viewed with. Financial controls, having good books, good records that actually show what the business is doing. Because when you go to a lender and you want to borrow from him, his microscope, his telescope to look at your business is your financial records. And if you can build a good track record, of keeping good, clean books that are accurate and consistent, then he has good visibility into your business, and therefore he can make decisions that he's comfortable with. So those are some of the things we like to think, that when we come into a project through our due diligence process, where we're sitting down with you, understanding your business, we can help you think about those issues and work through them. We also like to think that as part of our due diligence business, we will help you think about the softer side of your business, which includes issues on environmental and social, issues on climate change. How is your business built to tackle climate change issues? How is your business built to address some of the social issues of the day, whether it's women, whether it's the communities living around you, all those issues. Sometimes one likes to call them softer issues, but they are not soft when you run into issues. That's when you realize that they are not softer issues. In fact, if anything, they are the harder issues. They are harder than dealing with a cash flow problem. A cash flow problem, you can probably get a short-term overdraft from somebody. But if you have the neighboring community picketing at your gate, I don't think there's an overdraft that can fix that problem for you. So those are some of the things we like to work on and work with our clients to deal with. Now, going beyond that also, when we are working with companies, we want to think that we can bring by supporting that company, we give them a certain credibility, okay, whereby somebody will look and say, okay, IFC is working with that company. It must mean that XYZ has been checked off. That's how we like to think we help de-risk a project.
So if we don't do it today, it's going to be far worse tomorrow. We are where we are today, Africa, because we did not do it yesterday. We sat with the status quo. We accepted it as it was. And we need to bridge the gaps by changing our systems, adjusting them. Incredibly powerful. I want to thank you. And I'm coming to the floor now.
My name is Paul Okunlola. I work for UN Habitat, but I sit in the country office in Abuja. I think it's important that 3 issues. One, the business case model that we use to analyze our investments, is it appropriate for the nature of the problem we have? Number 2, financing frameworks that are available, that we have access to, are they fit for purpose if you want to house IDPs? And number 3, if that is the case, if corporate organizations have to rely on corporate social responsibility to house IDPs, how do we scale 3.5 million people who need that help?
My name is Adebola Akinwande. I work with the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA. That's the umbrella organization for private sector in Nigeria. So I've been here since yesterday, and well, every now and then, people have managed to chip in some of our concerns. But I noticed that no reference so far has been made for those people that are people living with disability. It is very, very important that we consider them. And more, these people have a voice in fora such as this. My thinking is that as we provide solutions for the IDPs, we're likely to step down on those people with special needs. However, they too have the need to make a living. They have families, they have needs that need to be addressed. So please consider them. Otherwise, perhaps in the next few years when we gather like this, they're going to be here in a meeting like this, and they're going to be saying that they have been ignored.
My name is Adeola Akinrimade. I'm literally a passerby, what we call like a drive-by shooting. I've got colleagues from Harvard here, from Kenya, so we just came to see, Harvard get together. It was supposed to be a 2-minute drive-by. But the reason why I'm holding the mic is that I walked in and my mouth went wide open. And I kept saying to Julia, so you have something like this. So I'm an executive director in the upstream sector, and I never knew something like this existed. And I've been in that industry for decades. So the point I want to make here briefly and to the point is critical mass. Why, when we're talking about financing and funding for something as critical and important as this, ignorance should not be an excuse. I'm not stupid, I just didn't know you existed. If I were, and NECA could have, if NECA or any other body were to apprise private entities in Nigeria and create a band, let's say there's a fund, and that fund you send out a band and say, you know what, you can contribute every year, just commit to contributing 3 million. Imagine you do that for 200 companies in Nigeria.
Wow.
Not a huge amount, not $10,000, just say 3 million, all of you. We will do it because it's not that significant. But you will have that critical mass, but you have to reach out to the private entities and create one bucket, because if you make it difficult, you won't get the result you want. Give us one bucket, give us bands that are not big hitters on our bottom lines and our budgets, and I think you might get some critical mass in terms of funding. In terms of a workable solution, that's what comes to mind.
And for everyone that is here, we are from different organizations, different countries. How are we going to assess this material, to assess ourselves if we have really contributed to what we commit ourselves doing?
Thank you.
That's my concern. So we should have a document in the form of action plan that will guide the step-by-step of what next we want to achieve from this meeting.
Can I say we stand with Sudan in this moment of crisis? And those numbers staggering. And just take a minute to just remember how many internally displaced people there are on this continent today. They are our brothers and our sisters. There's a word many of you will know, Utu. Humanity. African belief in that is strong and deep, and I want to reignite that as we hear from you and as we hear from each other, that we root ourselves in solutions, because it is who we are as Africans. It matters to us. Community matters. I come to the panel for your final thoughts and final words. We're going to be going away back to our spaces today, and hopefully not to do things the same way. Hopefully something will shift and something will change. What is the one thing you will take back and do to drive the shift and the transformation? And is there any actor in this room you want to share a message with, or you would like to connect with? This is an opportunity. Let me, Christian, start with you on that side this time.
You know, have you ever had an idea that you thought was a great idea, and you wanted to execute it, to bring it to fruition, but you are short of capital? You know, okay, there are many of us who are sort of employee types, but there are many of us who are entrepreneurial. Adeline probably is more like that, the entrepreneurial type person. And I think in IDP camps, there will be lots of Adelines there, I suspect. And I think that's why this conference, we're talking a lot about the financing, isn't it? Because it's trying to help the people who have got those ideas, and great, brilliant ideas, game changers, but they are missing that capital to get it going. You know, and we want to give them that opportunity. I remember the head of the IOM spoke and talked about the rights, you know, of human beings, I guess, but it includes the IDPs. You know, the right to self-development, the right to improve themselves. You know, and I think I thought that stuck with me. So if we have got people who have got ideas, we want to support them, and that's why this subject is important.
Let me come to you next, Edward, please.
I think that to truly sustain development, we need to move away from grants. So we talk around financial inclusion, especially within the IDP community. So what we tend to do is banks go around and say, open an account and deposit money. The reality is financial inclusion is a full cycle. You've got to open an account, learn how to save, learn how to spend responsibly, and also borrow and repay back in return. So the idea of blended financing, using the grant funds, working with stakeholders that have the competence, because the core competence of a bank is to manage risks. And yes, I agree with you. Most of the time, we run away from risk, right? But the idea is to manage that risk and go into blended finance. Because if you're receiving money and it is free, you spend it. I'm a financier. I know that probably about 20% of the people I lend money to, the first payment out of the money I've lent to them doesn't go towards the need. Right? So I would lend you money for a business, and the first thing you do is you pay school fees. The truth is it's required. It's an important need for you, but it's not going to grow your business. Now, if you give a grant and what you are expecting is community development, the truth is, from what I have seen, you don't get much of that. You get personal needs met. But then if we're able to do this together and move to a point of blended financing, take that fund, and you're giving it at a really reduced rate.
Yes.
And then there's somebody monitoring that business to grow, ensuring that on a monthly basis you've sold, you've created, you've manufactured what you say you're going to manufacture, and you've made the revenues you say you're going to make, and you are able to repay back this loan and still keep enough for yourself to sustain yourself. You'll be surprised how fast that community will grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Tarela.
Thank you very much. I'll end with some reflections, basic reflections. First is, you solve a problem based on your understanding of the problem. And what we do as a bank is to have a comprehensive, holistic understanding of the challenges we face in Africa. And this is reflected in the way we think about these problems and the solutions that we come up with. Specifically, this is why we don't have one tool alone, and we have blended finance, impact investing, and de-risking, and different tools to respond to these challenges. And these tools are also available to the private sector. They're available to the government. Because in our processes, engagement has a sovereign engagement and a non-sovereign engagement. And this non-sovereign engagement is where we work with private sector. And we are inviting private sector players to see the challenges that we are addressing in this room, internal displacement. And yesterday, in fact, we were talking with colleagues from the UN about the whole SDGs as a business opportunity, that the value chain that will lead to achieving, actualizing the SDGs in Africa are in themselves a business opportunity for the private sector. They are not corporate social responsibility or charity works. They are to provide health care, to provide sanitation, to provide water. These are business opportunities. And we need African businesses in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Mali, in Egypt, to see and invest in this and be patient. Private sector needs to be patient, and we provide the resources to enable, to facilitate that patience as a bank. So come, engage with us, speak to the partners, and also join the ongoing processes. And in this room, when you talk to the colleagues, you'll see that there are several institutional processes that are ongoing. We need to connect these processes to produce the outcomes that we want to see in our continent, which is economic development.
Thank you. Thank you for that powerful perspective and for welcoming private sector to come and look for AFDB and partner with and work with the AFDB. Adeline, you have the final word. What's your message to everybody as we close?
Thank you. So I'll leave with one statement and one question. The statement is that behind every institution, behind the numbers, behind the risk, behind the business, behind the private sector, there are people, there are lives. So when you see a company, it's not just a company. There are people counting on that company to live. Let's not forget that we are humans, and it's humans lending to humans. So that will be the statement. And the question is, I think to bring together in one room all the decision makers who can make a change, who can have an impact, proves that we have the willingness to make a change. So the willingness is there. Now, how do we move from wanting to do to actually doing? Because as I said earlier, every day that we spend not solving the crisis is deepening the crisis. It's not standing still. So there is an urgency. When we sit here for 2 days and we talk, when we get out of here, we need solutions and we need to start implementing them. Every day that we don't find a solution, there's another Anatrans that is putting 100 IDPs that were already working. We are talking about finding solutions. Solutions that have been found and lost. So there's another Anatrans that's putting back 100 IDPs in the camp without any jobs. There's another Anatrans that's losing 1,800 other jobs for women who were working. Every single day we don't find a solution. The crisis is deepening and is making it even harder for us to address it. So how do we move from wanting to change to actually changing?
A roadmap for change, leveraging technology by the private sector, shifting perceptions of IDPs as viable market participants, and recognizing that Africa's greatest asset isn't its land, but its people. And even in a room full of finance professionals focused on the bottom line, there was one resounding agreement. It's time to bank on Africa. You've been watching State of Africa. Until next time, goodbye.